I work here at the University of Edinburgh on several matters around computer vision and machine learning. Today, I'll talk to you a little bit more on the healthcare side. And I think you heard already the long title. Just very briefly, so you can get an idea of how this messed up accent is coming from. So I got my undergraduate degree in Greece. Then I moved to Chicago, where I did my PhD, and then I stayed on board as a faculty with electrical engineering, computer science, and radiology. Then I moved to Italy for 5 years, and then for the last 5 years, I've been in Edinburgh. So you can see the accent reflects all the places that I lived around as well. So very briefly, I wanted to tell you a little bit some of the stuff that we do. Oops, that's not the right slide, but that's okay. What I wanted to talk mostly was about the fact that we don't do only machine learning computer vision for healthcare, we do it for several applications. So I'll tell you mostly about the healthcare domain, but we also work a lot on how can we combine imaging and non-imaging data, how can we deal with the issues of privacy in data. We work a lot actually on computer vision for agriculture and plant phenotyping. It's kind of like the dual heads of the lab. And also we try to see how we can think of situations where we have less resources. So, and by less resources, we mean in any case, either less data or less annotations. So for example, how can we learn from scribbles or less computational power? So we were one of the first group in 2011 to come up with working on how we can build pipelines working with Python on the cloud with the PyCloud startup company. So we are actually humans doing machine learning. We are not yet replaced by AI to try to do machine learning. I think that's a good thing. So we work, as I told you before, on several areas of how we can do more with less, whether we can combine information, when we can use generative models, and we work a lot also with Canon Medical, who one of their offices is here in Edinburgh. We work also on privacy and data leakage as part of a very big project here in Scotland called iCared to try to put AI within the National Health Service. So how can we install machines behind the health service in a protected environment such that we can train AI models and test them and evaluate them and so on. Some of the people that you see in the picture have now moved on. So Hao Xuan is a faculty in Zhangjiang University. Agis is working for Intromics. And I think our intern now is at UC Irvine. So great stuff overall. But today I'll talk to you a little bit more about Disentangled learning. And I need to tell you why we need to do more with less first. Then I'll tell you how some of the things that we've done in achieving this with Disentangled learning. And I'll move on with some open questions and challenges. Now, the healthcare, I think, I don't know if you realize it, but it's actually under a perfect storm. We have a considerably aging population. These are the two age pyramids. On the left is the UK, on the right-hand side is Japan. The costs are continuing to increase. We approximately spend about 10% in the UK of our GDP in healthcare costs. And despite everything that we think, actually, we do have a shortage of experts. So particularly radiologists, we don't have enough hours for them to read images. So the question that is an overarching question for all of us working in healthcare is how can we deliver better care for less? Now, the area that I'm going to talk today was about medical imaging, and particularly I work with a modality called MRI. What I don't want to teach you about MRI now, but I wanted you to keep a picture in mind. So this is what happens when a patient that has some, let's say, suspicion that it has a cardiovascular disease will enter into hospital and will get an MRI scan. That MRI scan actually is different types of pictures. Think of this camera with different settings, and they will collect different pictures. Some of them will be movies, some of them will be in 2D, some of them will be 3D. So there will be thousands of images just in one exam of a single patient. And at the same time, we will have a healthcare record, which is an unstructured text that captures what this patient's history or current condition is or complaints and so on. So you can readily think that this is a tremendous amount of information explosion even from a clinician's point of view. So, of course, then some people postulate that it will be a considerable investment and interest to see what we can do to use AI or machine learning in healthcare. So, for example, we can use uh, algorithms and models that can try to segment and delineate anatomy so you can measure quantifiable some of the organs or some of the pathology. You can classify whether images have disease present, or you can predict some of the outcomes about this patient. If you think about it a little bit more at the healthcare level provision, you can think of collecting the data from a lot of patients, maybe doing together with genotyping, and think about the phenomics and the phenotyping relationships between, let's say, the appearance of anatomy, pathology, and so on, together with some of the genetics in a phenotyping population level analysis. And if you think about even further ahead, you have prescription, where now you can think of an AI where it can prescribe treatments or try to predict the path that the patient will try to take. What I try to convey to you today with my presentation is that in order to do all of this, we need better data representations. So I'll try to tell you a little bit in a very, very short while what is a good representation with some examples. So it's really hard to do this thinking of hearts. So for now, I'll use cars, okay, just for a few slides. So imagine that you have pictures of these cars, and I ask you the question, how many variables affect the identification of a car, meaning is there a car present in the scene? Like you have, imagine that you're a camera on top of an autonomous car and is looking at the street and wants to detect, is there a car in front of me? So what are these variables? So for example, we can think some of the variables that we should be sensitive to. For example, the location of the car, or is there a car in the scene? Should we be insensitive, for example, to the color? So we do not want the output of the algorithm to be different whether the car is yellow or red or gray. So you can think of some of the variables that we want to capture that we are sensitive to or insensitive to. Now, if I change the task and suddenly say, can you please tell me where the car is, not just anywhere in the car, you now see that the location of the car becomes a variable that we want to be sensitive to. And this kind of visual example tries to teach you a little bit about the idea of an invariant versus equivariant representation. The current time paradigm in machine learning actually has limitations. So this is how the current paradigm looks like. So we have the the current paradigm relies on supervised machine learning. So let me tell you a little bit how that relates to the variables. So imagine that we have a camera, and that camera is looking at the scene, and we try to estimate the position of the camera. So we can have several variables that estimate the position of the camera related to the scene. We have some variables that will capture the light of the sun, the location of the sun, its color, and so on, the texture of the car, the material of the car, the color of the car, and so on. And then anything around about the scene, and we can just ignore it and keep it at, say, let's say, only three variables, just to be simplistic. So you have many different variables that actually will capture the semantics and the appearance of that scene. So the current paradigm says that in order to capture what I'm sensitive and insensitive to, I need to collect lots of data, and I need to label this data. And this is an implication of the information bottleneck, and why we are not why we have to do this. But disentangle representations, on the other hand side, try to, given the data presented, try to uncover these factors of variation and capture them as best as possible, discarding as little information as it's practical for the task. So ideally, what I want you to think about is disentangle representations, try to capture in it their internal representation that somehow try to learn and compartmentalize these variables that you might think are affecting the scene. So they try to keep information about the data as much as possible, but organize it such that you know what you need to be sensitive to and what you need to be insensitive to, which we call it nuisance. And it has been shown that this type of variables learned by Disentangle learning can solve several tasks. And also has been shown that you can enable interventions. Basically, you can conditionally change one of the variable and see how would that look like. So, for example, if I have learned a variable that controls the color of the light, I can change the color of the sun. I can change the whether it's the dusk or the dawn or bright daylight and see how the output would have looked. Back into our context of the medical scene, imagine that we have this data where in this axis we say the patient is changing versus in this axis the scanner is changing. So in this location, in this direction, you will see the anatomy changing, but in this direction, only the scanner characteristics will change. So it's the same patient going into a different scanner. And maybe that scanner will be a bit brighter because it has higher test time. So it will be nice if we can take an input image and try to break it apart into things that relate something to the anatomy, to the presence of local regions, and something related to the statistics of that image and its appearance, the light, the intensity of each object, and so on. And this type of representations actually could be very useful for several computer vision, particularly in medical image analysis tasks. So what I described to you today, it's called Disentangle learning, and it's actually blowing up in terms of popularity in the last few years. And just about a year ago, even Scientific American had an article about why disentanglement could be very important in terms to reach more, let's say, AI that can do more in terms of just being like purely supervisedly trained. If you want to learn more about what Disentangle learning is, we gave a tutorial in the last MICAI conference a couple of months ago, and the videos are available on the MICAI platform, and also you can find some description on the website. To recap, as of now, in this a little bit longer introduction, I hope I told you about the benefits of Disentangle representation, and now I'll tell you a little bit how we can do more with that. So first of all, why should we do more with less? So this is kind of like a motivating slide. On the left-hand side, you see the performance as we increase in the number of millions for an image recognition task coming out of Google, and the right-hand side from the Facebook, where they're using their Instagram acquisition, where they use 3.5 billion images. So clearly, deep learning needs lots of data and does not seem to want to stop in terms of how much it can hoover up and learn from them. So but in medical imaging, we don't have this much data. So how can we do more with less? So a few years ago, we set back to try to think of a model of an architecture that tries to achieve several things. We wanted to learn from not only MRI, but also from CT, from ultrasound, from healthcare records, from serum results, and learn from different levels of annotations. So from segmentations, from healthcare records. We wanted to basically develop a model that can learn from different inputs, understands the different inputs, relates information across space and time, and also learns from different annotation sources. So to do more with less, we said, well, let's start to learn also from unsupervised data. So rather than use the classical model, for example, for segmentation, where you need to have pairs of input images and their corresponding mask, we said, well, why don't we take advantage of other images as well? And in that sense, we get semi-supervised learning, which means the annotation comes for free because there is no annotation. The other thing we said, well, what if we have some images that we have extracted from the healthcare record, the left ventricular volume, which means how many bright pixels there are within the myocardium. So we said we can take these images and assign them a value, and we can take advantage of multitask learning and take advantage of task correlation. Or we said, well, why do we learn only from MRI? Maybe we can learn also from CT. So we can develop a model that works together for MRI and CT and pool the data together. So the way we did this is known as disentanglement. So I'll walk you through a little bit how does it work, and you can find more details in the paper. So we take an image, we pass it through an anatomy encoder, which is going to learn these binary channels where each pixel will be either on or off, and if they're on, it means they belong to the same entity. And I'll tell you a little bit what we mean by entity later. But then we take the image and we extract a vector representation that tells you something about the imaging characteristics of that image, whether it's coming from a CT or an MRI scanner, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a vector. So we have a multi-channel tensor and a vector. These ones get combined through a decoder to recreate the input, or view the anatomy factor. You can get it and you can push it down and go through a segmentor, or you can attach a predictor and do regressions to other tasks, such as left ventricular volume. So here we have a model that via reconstruction we do semi-supervised learning, and this anatomy factor tries to teach the machine, well, try to group these things together because they will be useful for several other tasks down the line, not just only for reconstruction. So overall, the model works very well. We can train now good segmenters at a fraction of annotation cost. On the top row, you see there the percentage of how many input label data do we need to give. And the model works very well across, doesn't vary a lot, and it beats other models and, of course, the classical supervised learning. So the code is available as well if you want to try it. Now, let me show you a little bit the benefits of actually doing semi-supervised and multitask learning. So let's say we take some data and we label only 6% of those, and we obtain a 75.6% of accuracy with respect to how good our segmentations are. And then we found another data set where now we have some left ventricular volumes, and we use that in our multitask learning framework, and we see the accuracy increase to 83.2. And you say, well, what's that about? Why is this even useful? Well, it's as useful as giving 8 times more pixel level annotation. So, and it's much easier to find these biomarkers recorded on PACS, on electronic healthcare records, rather than segmentations to be saved in the PACS. So this is why that is important. Of course, we can also pull data. So you can see here that once we combine MR and CT data, we improve performance either in MRI or in CT with respect to using one of the methods as well. Now, the same model, the same architecture can be used with a small trick to actually take advantage of temporal correlation. Because if you see the heart, the sequence that we use is a movie, so it shows the heart pumping. So we said, well, neighboring images in that video, neighboring frames, should be similar. This means that neighboring anatomical factors, because it's an equivariant representation of the input, should also be similar. And we use that as a self-supervised objective in order to improve the need for even less annotations. And this is, again, completely free. You don't need to spend the annotation level that was presented in this paper. Just to show you actually the boost that we get. Even at 3%, the blue bar is the previous model. The green on the left-hand side is the classical supervised learning. You can see the new one that is on the right-hand side, kind of like orangely looking. You can see the performance boost that you get. Even at 100%, you do better than the fully supervised one because you regularize better. What you can do more with these learning representations, you can actually use them to bridge a gap. So we know for a fact that the more data we collect from different sites, the better performance. But it's very hard to collect data from different parts of the world, different hospitals, and so on. So there was a recent MICAI challenge where they said, well, if I give you data trained on the vendor or a few vendors of the scanners, would you be able to do better in how you will do when in an unseen vendor? So a vendor variation you will think about is a different kind of like camera. So you will think of the different appearance characteristics, different resolution, the image statistics, and so on. Although there can also be variation in terms of subject position, but also at the same time, because of the way the study was designed, you also have variations of different population. So we wanted to see, well, can we do better in that? And trying to see how we can improve upon this, given the amount of data that we have left, we have available. So what we did actually is that we take this model that I showed you before, we parse it through our models, we extract the anatomies, we extract the modalities, and we have 3 available vendors. And now we actually mix and match, and we create new samples that try to bridge something in between these things. So we mix the anatomies of one with the modality rates of the other. So we create lookalikes as if they were traveling, as if the same patient was traveling at different vendor sites. So through this, we're trying to learn something better. And you can see the results of this exercise on the paper if you're interested. So to recap up to here, I hope I convinced you that trying to break the image apart into modality and anatomy, it's something useful. What I want to tell you a little bit next is a little bit even harder, and it's trying to emulate how radiologists view. If you look at them, they actually have these very big screens in front of them, and they actually what they do is that they load the different images from the different scans within the same within the same scan protocol, and they look at the images represented simultaneously. They look for correlations across the different images to see what they have common, and then they try to find and separate what is unique and different between each image. So we wanted to actually create the same thing in a model, in particular in cardiac. So these are two different sequences, the LG that looks at the infarct in the heart, and then you have the 9 slice sequences in this case of the patient. The top is static, the bottom you're supposed to see it flickering. It actually is a movie. So you have the timing is different between these two sequences. So the scene is dynamic, the LG is static, you have different thicknesses. In the top you have 10, in the bottom you have 9, you have different resolutions, different intensity patterns. So basically, if you want to create an algorithm that's going to be able to say, well, identifying all of this, what makes sense, I have to match pictures in order to learn the correlations between the two and identify what is unique. So to be more dramatic, I have to create an algorithm that during learning and during inference can match and find a match upon all these pictures from the input and the pictures of the output. Sorry, on the input from the both ends of the LG and the scene. To do that, we propose an algorithm called DAFnet, which is Disentangle, Align, and Fuse. So for each input image, we present all other possible images. We disentangle them to a common anatomical space, which is like what I showed you before. This common anatomical space gets aligned through a spatial transformer, and these are usually max fused, and the max fusion is going to a task, for example, for segmentation. So now what happens is the representation has to learn that if there is something unique I should keep, and it's only present in one modality, I need to put it in a separate channel. Now, the max fusion, for things that are common, they're encouraged to overlap in order to solve this registration problem. And at the same time, the way we do it is how good they overlap is also an indicator of whether the pair that I gave you is correct. So we give all possible pairs, and the pair and the algorithm obtains a weight according to how well they overlap as a way to judge, well, is this a good pair? If it's a good pair, I'll use the gradient as a way to learn. And we do exactly the same thing during inference. So with this model, we can actually train models with 0% of annotations for LGE. And we've done several experiments in the heart and abdominal organs and so on. So the paper is on arXiv and just recently got accepted the transactions on medical imaging. But just to show you visually what happens is that on the right column side is our method. They are on the left-hand side is some of the classic supervised ones, and everybody else in the middle is another semi-supervised approach. So you can see on the right-hand side, our model can learn and can be used to do multimodal, like multi-input inference at inference time. So you can either use it with one image or you present it two images and any image pair, and at the end will tell you the best. For the last few minutes, I wanted to tell you about an even harder task. What I wasn't able to cover is all our work that we've done on disentangling pathology with either strong or weak annotations, but I have the reference there for you if you're interested. But I wanted to tell you about an even harder task that is very exciting because of trying to disentangle age. So recall this example that I told you about prediction. So you want to develop machines thinking forward that can predict what can happen to a patient. This is what can happen to a patient after myocardial infarction. So they can have a stroke, a cardiogenic shock, congestive heart failure, cardiac tamponade, arrhythmias, or pericarditis. So wouldn't it be nice that at the time that the patient is presented at the clinic, that somehow an AI can inform the clinician that this is the most likely outcome in a few months from now. So be aware or something. Then the clinician might prescribe something different. So in a general, we would like to create machines that, given the now, they can predict how the future will be and think of taking into account the aging take into account changes in the environment, changes in disease, or changes in the treatment. So you can see, well, if I were if I'm presenting to the hospital today and if I were to do this intervention, how would my future look? That's called a counterfactual. So it's very interesting to do these studies with proxy examples. So very famous proxy for this is the face aging. So you can think of how would I look in 30 years. I know what my wife would say, but the equivalent difficult problem is how would my brain look in 30 years? Now, you can all know that collecting images on faces is actually relatively easy because we give them for free to Facebook. But for brains, that's hard. From a mathematical perspective, this is learning an autoregressive function. So given the input x of t and a time te, we want to predict the future at xt plus te, so we need to learn this function f. Unfortunately, we don't have longitudinal data. We only have sparse samples of different people with their different characteristics. So how can we learn to disentangle the aging process from these individual characteristics? So we recently devised a model where you learn this autoregressive function as a generator, but then your discriminator tries to learn the conditional probability and the joint distribution, not the conditional, the joint distribution of the outputs of that generator as a way to regularize this problem. And I'm not going to tell you about how it works, but I'll just show you some very exciting results. So this model has been trained without any longitudinal data. So on the left-hand side here, you see an input patient at age 67. And the top, you say, well, that patient actually was a control. So if they stay as a control, you can see that their brain is aging, is changing in morphology as they go up to age 77. And right here on the top, you will see these white numbers there. This is the predicted apparent age. So we train another model to predict the age from the image. If now the patient has Alzheimer's disease, which is the bottom rows, you can see now that the changes are more pronounced in the brain. So the changes of the brain are more evident as they age. And in fact, the predicted age, it's 80.4, although the patient is 77, which is consistent with the fact that Alzheimer's disease ages your brain faster. And again, it's an exciting model because it allows you, by learning how to synthesize the future, you can actually try to learn better internal representations of how you are at the moment. So in the next few minutes, I know I'm 1 or 2 minutes behind, but I think we should be done on time. I'll just tell you a little bit of some of the challenges and opportunities, and then I'll conclude. So I don't know if you have realized this, but healthcare is a very, very challenging domain. We have less data, which are very harder to acquire. Most of the publicly available data have been collected for very narrow tasks, and they are largely cross-sectional. What we can sometimes you hear in computer vision and machine learning as in the wild, that's not really in the wild. You're working in a hospital, in a population. These characteristics means that the patients are correlated with themselves. Uh, Healthcare is not imaging alone, it's multimodal. So you have genomics, you have serum results, you have electronic healthcare records. It's a truly complex and convoluted problem. In fact, all the last hundreds of years, I think, since modern medicine, we're trying to discover about the biology of the body and the pathology. We have thousands of diseases, and some of them are extremely, extremely rare. And deep down, actually, what we see in an image may not be the real cause. So we have unknown causal relationships that do affect our learning task and do affect our representations. This is an example of what I told you before that's going to come again, that of this example that I showed you with the cars. What had I had cheated and I said, well, there are these variables. Well, if there are like 13 variables and we allow only 1,000 of different values for each parameter, we need 10 to the power of 40 images in order to capture this variability. So we have combinatorial explosion here. If we accept that the world is actually compositional, like basically you can identify these variables that will change, enumerating all these possibilities leads to this explosion. And disentanglement can help address this because we can identify the factors, these variables, with even fewer annotations, hopefully. We can hopefully associate and identify causal relationships. There was a slew of papers just recently in ICLR also 2021. about the relationship between disentanglement and causality. We can offer generalizable representations, basically representations that can be transferred to different tasks. Again, another recent ICLR paper, and also hope to think of how can we create representations that also respect privacy and reduce bias. In summary, I hope I had convinced you that medicine is complex and needs a lot of data, uh, and do hope that disentangled representations will allow us to reduce the need for supervision, solve more tasks simultaneously, and also combine and embed some of these information priors, so or biases that we want to go encode for some of the tasks that we know. But don't get me wrong, there is tremendous amount of challenges lying ahead in terms of complexity of the models, the data themselves, the healthcare implications, the causality relationships, and so on. And we have a number of big grants. One is included paid by Canon Medical and Royal Academy of Engineering. So if any of you is interested in tackling further, please drop me a line. Without further ado, I would like to thank my team. Uh, Everything that you've seen today has been is open source. The code is available on the website in the bottom. My collaborators across the world, my funders, and yourselves for your attention and for the kind invitation. Thank you.